Okay. Hello, everyone online and in the center. Welcome to louder. Okay. Hello, everyone online and at the center. Welcome to Sunday's teachings on Shanti Devas a Bodhisattva, a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. So we're very lucky to have Venerable Gache here with us, Venerable Tenzin Gache. He was born in the US in the Boston area. He attended college there and then he ordained, and he's been living in South India in Bailkape for the last 16 years, 20 years. And he recently completed his Gache program, and he's now in the advanced Gache program called the Laram Gache program. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Gache program is like an equivalent to a PhD, but so much more because it also involves Buddhist practice and very detailed study. So, obviously, we have someone extremely experienced here. I'm very fortunate. Thank you so much, Venerable Gache, for leading the sessions.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay. Okay. Good morning or good evening. Some of you, various places, looks like. So hello, everyone here. Welcome. I apologize. Sometimes I've been told when the screen's right in front of me, I'll look at the screen, and then everyone out there gets neglected. So I'll try to make sure I look up sometimes too. Okay, so let's begin with some prayers. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. That my practice of giving another perfections may become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. That my practice of giving another perfections may become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. My practice of giving another perfections may become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have the happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness without free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Saju Bholgi Doju Meido Namri Ramling Nire Gyambhalu Sangye Shindo Mede Uwagi Yogunanda Shila Jaba Joirangana Mandala Gandaria Dayami. Okay, so we can just sit quietly for a couple of minutes here. Begin. Okay. So we'll begin today talking about Bodhisattva Charyavatara. For those of you who were here last night, as I said, this text I have more familiarity with than the wheel weapon mind training. So I have my Tibetan copy, which is what I'm more familiar with. I did read the English quite a bit earlier when I was younger too. So I think you've had, is this only the third class now? Or that on the maybe it's been a little longer?
Yes.
Sixth. Okay, yeah. Okay. I was thinking I read week he talked about chapter 2. So as I've said previously, I think when I taught on this here a couple times, this is a text that personally I feel very inspired by. It's had an important impact on my own life. And as we go through the different chapters, I can tell a little story about different times when I was reading these. So I think I've said the story here before of how I discovered this text when I was 20 years old, when I was getting quite serious about Tibetan Buddhism. I'd already been practicing Buddhism for a couple of years, and then I went to the bookstore there in Boston, and there were the whole shelf of Buddhist books, and I just reached for this one, and by chance, but it was the right one. It seemed to be the right moment. I looked at it, so I decided to buy that, and then it stayed with me for about a year. I think I kept it on my person most of the time. So I think for me this was what inspired me most of all to follow this particular path, and it's always been kind of foundational. So it's not unique to me by any means. It's in our monastery, it's basically understood as the foundation of the Mahayana path. Not this text per se, it's the Buddhist teachings, but it's the text of all the Indian texts, the one that most clearly summarizes the practices. We have the wisdom side. We talk more about Nagarjuna's text, although this one, some of you know, also there's the wisdom chapter, which is essentially the same reasoning as Nagarjuna uses, but written more for one's personal meditation. So it's very useful in that regard. But especially its whole outline of the Bodhisattva practices, and especially the attitude, most of all, that we try to cultivate. So that's actually what we'll most be focusing on today. If we get to it, we'll see we have a few more verses in chapter 2, and then chapter 3 is all about adopting the Bodhisattva attitude. Chapter 3 is actually, it's essentially taking the Bodhisattva vow. When His Holiness gives the Bodhisattva vow, often he'll just do so straight from chapter 3, and we'll just read through that. So that's something you can do regularly if you find it inspiring to read through that. But I was thinking back, I said about personal stories about this. I remember when I was in after college, I think that same year after I'd first been reading it, I had two other close friends who were also very interested in Buddhism, and we would sit in our dorm room and recite this together. I remember I think it was important for all of us at that time. So since then, I've been trying to live by those principles. And then of the other two, one of them actually has died, unfortunately, but the third one was also interested in becoming a monk, and he went to Japan for a couple of years, but he decided that maybe in this life it wasn't his path, so he came back to the USA. But anyway, he became a doctor, and he's been practicing in New York City for a long time. So I think he definitely has the right attitude and is trying to apply these principles as he benefits others, which is in a lot of ways more directly beneficial than what some of us are doing as monastics. So appreciate that a lot. But for me, most of all, it's not that I say I've mastered it by any means, but my hope through trying to maintain connection with this text is that if I'm having to have to be born again, then I encounter it again, just like I did this time. So try to maintain a connection with this as much as we can with these principles, which are quite lofty principles. But it's when we see that some people abide by this, and we see examples of it, it seems that maybe it's really possible. Of course, His Holiness is the best example, but there are many others we have right here behind us. And I remember when Kabje Lama Zober Bishe showed the aspect of passing away, then we had prayers at Kopan House at Sarah J. And at that time, Geshe Kelton was the director of Kopan House, so he gave a talk about Lama Zober and Bishe and saying we talk about anybody who lives by the principles in Bodhisattva Charyavatara. This is a person who embodies those, just tirelessly working for others without any apparent thought of oneself or one's own preference, one's own happiness. It's just not there. It's like an empty shell almost. There's just work for others. There's nothing behind it. Of course, there's great wisdom, but there's nobody there. There's nobody thinking, I have this experience and I'm doing this. It's just purely focused on benefiting. So we try to cultivate that and try to embody those principles as much as we can. And I find if you read this, then there's no room to feel depressed, to feel inadequate, to feel despair about the situation in the world or anything like that. I think actually we talk about things and frustrations with the way things are going in world politics or whatever. I don't know if it's that different than it ever has been, and just things go in different cycles. But my general feeling on it, of course, this is impossible to. It's not an easy thing. It sounds easier than it is, but I think the biggest issue is not that we have any particular problem as a human race, more that we just don't work together. If we did, then there wouldn't be the problems would be solved mostly. And so if everyone tried to live this way, the problems would largely fall away. We have all the tools we need. It's just a matter of applying them. So that was my feeling anyway. When I was in college, I decided to pursue this path with the feeling that if everyone did this, then the world would be a better place. So it's probably best if I try to do it. I can't tell everyone else to do it, but if I tell everyone else to do it and I don't do it myself, then it's really unlikely it's going to ever happen. So we start one person at a time and then try to remind others about this. So I think we've already gone through all of the introduction of the text and the background to it. So I don't want to get too much into that today. Otherwise, we don't get to the verses. So maybe we can just begin in chapter 2, which is the confession of. So in Tibetan, they were digba, and really, we could translate it as confession of sin. But it is what I like about the word sin is it's very concise. But for a lot of people, that has a very negative connotation, which is not desirable. It's not. We have the understanding that this is talking about sort of offense to God or something like that. That's not really the concept here. And it's just, you can say things that create more negativity. So that's why they often translate it as negativity. It's just a little bit more weighty and not quite as powerful a term. But however we put it, the point is that we look back on actions we've done, because in the first chapter, of course, it was about just speaking about the benefits of the mind of enlightenment, about this thought that may I achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Just to briefly recap on that, of course, the understanding is that it's a twofold wish. The wish, first of all, is that all beings be free of suffering. That is the foundation. But on that basis, then recognizing that the best way to actualize that, the only real way to actualize that, is to guide beings in order that they may free themselves. We can't, it says in the famous verse, the Buddha does not wash away beings' sins with water or dispel migratory suffering with his hands. The only real way to help others in the long term is to teach them. And to teach others, we have to know ourselves. You can't teach somebody something that you don't know. And not only know it, but have actualized it ourselves. It's not, like I just said, it's not enough just to tell everybody else you should live this way, but I don't do it myself, but you all should. When you do, I'll start. But that doesn't work. We have to, as much as possible, actualize this, and then maybe there's not so much need for words, just by the example we set through that. So then the goal then becomes becoming fully enlightened and achieving the state of Buddhahood, where we can know the capacities of beings and know the best way to teach them. It's otherwise, no matter how much wisdom we have, even if we don't have this very deep, not just understanding, but also insight directly, we can understand others' minds and their backgrounds. Then it's very difficult to communicate it in an effective way. Otherwise, why not just give them the book? We can just go around handing books out. But sometimes it's good to have a person there, or somebody, a human being who understands and can listen to individual situations, which are always going to be unique. So we developed this inspired wish to achieve this result. And then, so on the basis of that, then it moves on to chapter 2, which is then he begins chapter 2 by saying, in order to guard this, and I must start by guarding my mind, and by it's saying, in order to, he says, Rinchen Sende Sumar Chawe, so it means in order to take up that mind, actually, in order to adopt that mind, to take the Bodhisattva vow, which means the vow to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, then I must first purify my mind. I must be ready for that. We must sort of like we prepare ourselves, just like if we, in the morning, if we make offerings on the altar, we clean the altar first, and we're cleaning our mind, preparing ourselves to take this vow. So that's why in chapter 2, then it goes through the making offerings to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, generating merit. And then there are reflections on imminence of death, thinking that there's not much time, I need to practice, and thinking about the need for going for refuge, and the need for guidance, that we recognize wanting to achieve Buddhahood is a lofty goal. It's not something we can achieve alone. Although, as I said, it's not something somebody else can give to us. At the same time, it's not something we can just do completely without any guidance. We need somebody to help us, to teach us, and to inspire us, and to help us know which way to go, which sometimes there are difficult decisions, and we can have if we have a lot of wisdom, sometimes we can know what's best based on our own estimation, but sometimes having somebody with greater insight to help with the guidance, then that's where we take refuge in beings who embody this. And ultimately, of course, refuge is about wanting to actualize that goal ourselves, taking refuge in the result that we will achieve. So the Buddha being the future Buddha that we will become, the Dharma being the future realization that we will actualize, and the Sangha being the steps along that path that we will achieve these stages of realization. Many ways to understand refuge. So anyway, that has been done, and then this chapter ends mainly with an admonishment to practice, thinking about that if we don't start now, then we'll never get there, and that there's only limited time until like the Buddha actually gave the teaching. Some of you might know that is called the Four Mountains. The Buddha was talking to a king and saying that, inspiring him to use the time well, saying that there are 4 mountains. If you are in the middle of a plain, like a field, and there were 4 mountains on either side, and they were closing in on you rapidly, what would you do? You'd be crushed between those 4 mountains. And the Buddha said, this is old age, sickness, death, and rebirth. Because they're just approaching us all of the time. So thinking that there's no escaping. So we have to use the time. So it's quite strong language, and that can be difficult. But this is essentially, if we really want to progress in our practice, this is the only way. We won't make progress if we don't have this foundation, the sense of urgency, the sense that this isn't just a nice feeling, something that we how wonderful it would be to be enlightened. Of course, we can inspire ourselves that way. As I said, when we're feeling depressed or down, then it's helpful to do that. But we also have to actually take action, not think that this opportunity is going to last. So I see you have here on the screen, it's at verse 62 or so. Now, as Geshe Keldon had put in our little teacher's chat that he reached to verse 57. Can anyone confirm or tell me if that's incorrect? Yeah, so I think it's 57. Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at verse 54, especially, which had already been done, but that one of the ones that I find very important, right? Tamal negi jikniya, nembengakshin chaguna, docha lasani guhi, negi tata mochi go. So that is, if I was in peril, if I was in danger of even an ordinary illness, like if I was sick and I had, so say I was diagnosed with a terminal illness or something very serious, then if I had to listen to the advice of the doctor, when I'm afflicted by the hundreds of illnesses, the illness with hundreds of faults, actually, which is attachment, which is desire attachment. When I'm perpetually afflicted by this, then what need to speak of the need to listen to the advice of the teacher or the person who can guide us to be free of that. So this is taking the attitude. This was the Buddha emphasized, that we ourselves are a sick person. But it's not a self-pitying attitude. It's just like it says in the Uttara Tantra. Forgive me about the Tibetan. I hope people don't mind, but it's how I remember them. So, Neni shecha negi guni pangchala, deni topcha meni debachawatar. So it's saying the sickness, the illness is the thing to be known. So if you have an illness, you first have to get diagnosed and know you have an illness. And and then you have to then recognize what is causing it and abandon that. So say you have a heart problem and the doctor says you're eating this food, stop eating that. So then you have to abandon that. And then health is what's to be achieved. You want to achieve the state of health. And the way to do that is to rely on the medicine, or whatever medicine will help you with that. So likewise, it says, so that is, then there's likewise, it's the Four Noble Truths. You have the truth of suffering, which is what's to be recognized. Recognize the situation that we're in. Recognize that we have the ordinary day-to-day suffering, but then also the ordinary experiences of happiness that we have are actually essentially the nature of change. It's not real happiness. It's just a variation on the same experience. So some of the good examples are like when you come in from a hot day into an air-conditioned room. It's not that it's inherently pleasurable. It's actually the suffering of being cold. But it feels pleasurable because it's a change from being hot. So we have to recognize that. And then also at a deeper level, that this is just the nature of being in contaminated aggregates. When we're born under the power of karma, that's just the nature of things. There's no way that we're going to find some perfect equilibrium where we are now okay until we achieve liberation, which is something quite different. That's what he talks about. So then recognizing the cause, which in this case is afflictions, it's the mental afflictions that create that karma and create this cycle. So that's like recognizing the cause of the illness. Why am I gaining so much weight? Well, it's because you're eating this. So why am I circling in cyclic existence again and again? It's because of these afflictions. And then recognizing that there's a state of health. There is a state of cessation. This is not impossible to be free of. This is not something that is just the nature of who we really are. That is the hardest one to recognize. This is what we spend many, many years. The other ones are not easy. for most people, even just recognizing truth of suffering is a major realization, but recognizing the truth of cessation and recognizing that there really is such a thing as liberation. It could take lifetimes to do that. So I was saying when we debate for many years in the monastery, that's what we are focusing on. We talk about emptiness. That's essentially what we're trying to do with emptiness, is to establish an understanding of cessation. And then we have the truth of the path, which is the medicine. It's the way to get there. How do we get to that state of cessation? So in this context, it's talking about recognizing ourselves as a sick patient. And until we do that, having a lot of very nice philosophy and a lot of good ideas is one thing, but actually seeing that I'm in danger. I have a terminal illness, and I need to apply a method for that before it's too late. So with that, we'll move back to verse 57, I think, which is where we reached last time. So it's saying if you approach even an ordinary precipice, right, or a cliff face, and of course you'd be very careful. You don't want to fall over the edge. You need to practice bayu, which was it conscientiousness? How is it translated here? Conscientious. So Thich Jinpa has suggested we use the word heedfulness, which is, I think both are good, but heedfulness is a little more concise. So it's take care. Don't be reckless. So likewise, the many thousands of fathoms deep, this precipice, then what need to speak of that? Which is talking about the precipice of cyclic existence. Right? That this will be the state of that we'll experience again and again. My teacher, Kebje Chirinpoche, you might know, when he was in retreat for 20 years, there was an interview with him in Mandala magazine in the late 90s. And somebody asked him about his experience in retreat and how he felt about things. I forget the exact question, but essentially his answer was that this life is so short. It's just like a dream. It's over so quickly. But the future life is very long. So many future lifetimes. Not just one life, but so many lives. So we have to make use of this time while we're here. It's just a brief instant. I remember reflecting on this when I was reading this all those years ago. At that time, I had some space in my mind. Nowadays, I'm very busy. But I was on the way out of college and thinking about what to do next. So I had a little bit of, I wasn't actually graduated, but I was kind of on the way out in my mind, I guess you could say. So it was easier to think about this and think that this life, it's just going to be over like that. So now I've lots of experiences in the meantime, but maybe someday at the time of death, I'll just remember it's all just like that. We every 2 weeks at the monastery when we recite the Pratimoksha Sutra, it's part of the monastic confession ritual. It actually says in the Vinaya, one of the main reasons we do the monastic confession ritual, of course, it's to confess one's downfalls, but one of the other major reasons is to remember impermanence. It's been another 2 weeks. Life is getting shorter and shorter. So every time we do that, then all the monks, they raise their arm and we recite this verse from the Diamond Cutter Sutra, right? Like the star, flame of a lamp, illusion of dew, bubble, dream lightning, and cloud, be all conditioned things like that. It's not. It'll all be over soon. But not everything will be over, right? This life will be over, but it's just one little step in the way, much longer precipice. So it doesn't have to be a precipice. The point is, if we don't practice now, that's what will happen. We'll create for ourselves. So it's best that we use the time. And then Terin Kori Michishe de Wadu Murdik Mayan, right? So saying today I won't, today only today I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to die today. To abide comfortably like that is inappropriate, is incorrect. Rik Mayan, it literally means it's illogical, it's not logically sound. And that we don't know. There's no reason. I'm going to die someday. Why is it not going to be today? Lama Zopa Rinpoche always used to say, it's best to think I'm going to die today. No harm in thinking that way. I suppose if it just makes us anxious, that's one thing, but that's not the goal here. We need a little anxiety. You don't want it to be totally stress-free. But we want to be able to think clearly. But if we knew we had to die today, what would we do, right? We probably would not be so concerned about little things, right? More thinking about the big picture, as we say. We try to maintain that mental state as much as we can. So so the time when I will no longer be certainly come. That's one way to reflect on it. Think that in how many years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years for sure, nobody will be here anymore. So what will matter then? Well, as he says much later in the text. Rapi Tondu Nortong Ching, Dani Kini Sochena, what is it? What is it? Jina Kini, Shina Dego Sudate. So he's saying, right, he's saying if we pursue wealth and fame, right? So some people, for the purpose of fame, they kill themselves. Not suicide per se, but they just sacrifice their life just to be famous for some cause. He says, they'll have a nice marking on my gravestone. When I'm dead, who is that going to benefit? So we could think that way. What is the use of this, all of this, when I'm gone? Will it matter to me so much? How I'm remembered? We don't want to be, it's good if we have the motivation, I want to have good impact on the world. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it's all about me and how I want to be immortalized, is that really going to matter? We go on to the next life. So what is going to matter to us at that time? And he says, Dala mi jiksu hijing de le jitang itagyur. Tomisawa megir na chichudahi de verdu. So he says, who will give me the state of freedom from fear? How can I be certain to be free of this state, this uncertainty that I experience? When it's certain that I will die, that I will become no more, then why do I abide here comfortably? So what I've experienced before, what do I still have? Sometimes this is at least the way some people think, is you want to have all the enjoyment you can while you're young, so that when you're old, you can sit and reflect and remember it and go to the good memories. It's good. I don't know if that's the case. I've never actually really tried to investigate this in a thorough way, but it's very useful to read the accounts of people who are old. What do they say? What do they say they remember most? And my general impression is that oftentimes people had lots of enjoyment as a young person. It's quite sad when they're old and they say, I remember this and this thing, and now it's all gone. We still had a wife and she's gone. I remember all those young times in the past when I had a healthy body, and it's gone. So is it a support when you're older, or is it a burden? Whereas if we do a lot of good things, it's quite likely that good things for others, good spiritual practice, good practices of charity and patience, and that's very likely to be something that will be supportive for us. We can think back and rejoice in the past actions that we've done. So what do I have? What I experienced before. Dani de la ne la me karangawer che. So we're saying, although and I don't have what I had, what is no longer with me, these things. He's saying that through attachment to it, then I have contradicted the advice of my teachers, my lama, guru. So that's the danger. There is advice to us to use our time well, but then I'll do so, but I just want to do this thing first. I want to have this enjoyment first. That's the danger of attachment. That's the danger then of pursuing pleasure, is then we lose control. Very few people just say, I want to waste my time, but it just happens because the mind is attached. And attachment essentially means exaggerating the qualities of things. We think this is so important. I just need this. Then it'll get to the practice, right? But it's an exaggeration. In the end, it doesn't really matter that much. You think back on it. Thought that when I was a young person, that just seemed so important. But then our priorities change. So then, Sansei Deran Dejin Du, Eran Shepa Nampang Ne, Chibura Shego Rogona Zara Miza Kumshirung. So this life, and then also my friends and family, all of those I will abandon. You think that way. We'll all be gone, but Chipo Gache Drogona, right? So I will go on alone. The example they use, I think it must be a Tibetan example. I haven't seen it, as I recall, in the Indian text. Because butter is a very common Tibetan example. If you have a piece of hair and a pat of butter and you just pull it out, then there's nothing left, right? So it's like that. We'll leave this life. It's like the pat of hair that is, so the lock of hair, or the, what's it, strand of hair that is pulled out of the pat of butter. So he's saying, what will be a benefit then? The benefit, the friends, the enemies. And as he said a few pages earlier, that all my friends will not remain, my enemies will not remain, I will not remain, nothing will remain. So all of this will be gone. You go on alone. Migawale to Neljung de She, right? So from non-virtue comes suffering. So how will I be free of that? Knowing that we have the results of our own actions ahead of us. So Ninsen Dr. Dagini, Inibashik Sambevik. So it is appropriate, it is correct that I think about this day and night perpetually. This is what we shall reflect on. Remembering that I have this load of karmic buildup, karmic baggage from the past. How can I be free of this? Because that is the case, and that is worth contemplating, rather than thinking about something else because it's more pleasant. It's not necessarily pleasant to think this way. It's like, again, with the example of an illness, we are diagnosed with terminal cancer. One way to deal with that is just try to forget about it. Do the best to enjoy the time we have and not think about it too much. If it was the case that there was no cure, then maybe that's the best approach, right? But if it seem quite silly if there was medicine that was perfectly available, but somebody just tried to avoid thinking about it, doesn't want to admit that they have a problem. Now, I say it might seem silly, but that's often the case. I don't know, cancer. I mean, most people, if they get cancer, they don't just refuse therapy and just enjoy themselves. But other things like more chronic illnesses, you just changed your lifestyle, it would get better, but people just don't do that. It's human nature, I suppose. So, similar thing here. There is a medicine. The Buddha taught the medicine, but it seems too hard. We're very habituated to our lifestyle and to what, unfortunately, is what society is telling us is what we should do. And don't waste your time in your life. You only have so many years, so use get as much enjoyment while you can. Why do you want to sit around thinking about the bad things in life? This is quite an opposite approach. Tani mishik timupe rangjinkana matoham. So now he's thinking about the past negativity that I've accumulated. So this is sort of the summary of this chapter. We already talked about the confession of sin or of negativity. So he's saying through my own, this is also important because it's not, sometimes the word sin get this negative connotation, but here it's saying, it's not saying through my own being bad person. It's saying through my own ignorance, through my own unknowing, I have created this. I have created ranjing hikanamatoa. So there's this distinction in Buddhist ethics about naturally negative actions and prescribed actions. Some of you might know about this. So a naturally negative action is something that's simply non-virtue by nature, no matter who does that action. So killing, stealing, things like this, no matter who does it, it's just negative by nature. It's not because there's any rule against it. But then Chepe Kanamatoa is things that are prescribed. So these are things that we undertake to practice. We commit to practice, but then we transgress our commitment. For those of us who have taken spiritual commitments or vows, and then to transgress those. So, of course, for monastics, there's quite a lot, but even for lay people, it's drinking alcohol is the primary one. But then, of course, those are among the precepts, the 5 precepts, the 5 lay precepts, and only one of them is prescribed action, which is alcohol. But there are other ones. If you take vows as a lay practitioner, as a Buddhist, as an upasika, then, of course, you also have the commitment to continually reflect on the qualities of the 3 jewels, to honor the 3 jewels. When you see a statue, to fold your hands. When you see a Dharma text, to put it in a high place. You see Sangha members to treat with respect, and also your fellow practitioners. Right? So that is also something that is prescribed. We've taken that commitment to do that. So then anything that transgresses that. Actually, it says actually for lay people, in terms of the alcohol or intoxicants, really, is probably a better way to put it, because it's not just alcohol, I think. There's a question, actually, what we just talked about this year. There's just a question of why among all the different prescribed actions, for monastics anyway, why is only alcohol singled out for lay people? It's because you lose control and then you create more negativity. So it's the most dangerous. So and also it talks about why, for just an aside, but among negativities of speech, right? So you might know of the 10 non-virtues. Among those, there's 4 of speech: lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, and then how do you say, idle speech or wasteful speech. Why is only lying a precept, right? For fully ordained monastics, all 4 of those are one commits to abstain from them. But it says because for lay people, if they are allowed to lie, then they would conceal their other negative actions. So it also helps prevent the other ones. And so it's not exactly that lay people are allowed to speak harshly. That's not quite the point. But the point is that it's a training, and to commit to very difficult things, we take it in stages. So the fundamental one is to be honest. That's the most important among speech, so that we can, the foundation of our practice. And likewise with alcohol, we maintain control of our actions. Otherwise, it opens the door for many more. So what Chariteva is saying here is, among these actions of naturally negative actions or prescribed, whatever I have done, Gombo Chengar Ngunsundu Teljar Dungel Jigzingi Yardayandu Chaksade Devatamshi Shaprgi. So I fold my hands in the presence of the protectors, which is talking about the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, just another way to refer to them, another way to think about them. And with a mind terrified by the future suffering results of these actions, then I prostrate again and again. And I confess those. So this is the summary of what's been discussed in this chapter. So of course, we can actually do this practice. One thing is just recite this chapter. That's one way to go through it. I know His Holiness, I've heard, he often advises students to recite the first 3 chapters every day. So that's one way, but of course we can do other confession practices. So we do prostration practices is excellent practice, and Bodhisattva meditation, recitation, things like these. They're all confession practices. Reciting the sutra on the 3 heaps. It's essentially when most of nowadays people, when they do that, they prostrate. But what he recommends in his book anyway is to recite in the chapter 5. He recommends to recite that every day, the Sutra of 3 heaps, which is the 35 confession Buddhas, right? It's often translated as the Bodhisattva confession of downfalls. It's another word actually for the same text, Tungchak, Tibetan. So, but usually nowadays people prostrate while they recite that, though you don't have to. If you can't prostrate for some reason, you can just recite that also and imagine prostrating. So we do that again and again. It's very good practice. We start early when you're a beginning practitioner. It's not that you ever get to a point where you don't need to do purification practice, but especially for a few years, it's good to really focus on that. Do a lot of purification practice that really help the mind to be ready to do more advanced practices. And then finally, Kempa Namgi Dagidi Lapa Sumdu Soul. So he's saying, all of you guides then take my negativity as a mistake. Please hold this as a mistake, right? See that it's not that I did this because I was intending to be a bad person. It's just, I was mistaken. Now I see it that way. This is repudiation we talk about, right? We talk about the 4 powers. That's the most important thing, is to recognize that what we did was a mistake. And then, Dini Sampo Malape Menche Dani Omigi, right? So this is not good. I don't know how is it translated here. Yeah, they're not good. That's what it says. So I don't know if any of you know anything about Tibetan. I mean, in colloquial Tibetan, we say yakpo. I don't know the origin of that word. Yakpo it's not in the classical text. It's a modern innovation, right? Say the word yak for a yak, you say in English, right? It's not spelled quite the same, but the pronunciation is similar. I don't know if that's why they say yakpo, but nowadays they say that. But in ancient texts, they use the word zangpo. But nowadays, zangpo is still a word that's used in colloquial Tibetan, but it's used more for like kindness. A person is zangpo means they're a very kind person, have a subdued mind. You wouldn't say like the cake is sangpo, you say the cake is yakpo, right? But the point here, is just that this is something that is, I mean, not good. Is in English doesn't sound very poetic, but it's not pleasing. I see this as a stain on myself. It's not who I want to be. I want to be free of these actions. So, enchidani yomigi. So from now on, I will not do them anymore. Of course, that's we could say essentially that this is the 4 opponent powers here, right? So repudiation of the past negativity, seeing it as a fault. And then going for refuge is the second, and that's the saying to my guides, right? Take it as a fault. And then applying an antidote, well, that was quite implied in the whole thing, I suppose. Talk about confessing and making prostrations. And then, of course, committing not to do it again. And otherwise, it's not very effective, right? If we say, what I did yesterday was so bad. And tomorrow I'll do it again, but tomorrow night I'll confess it again. Right? That's not the right attitude. So we want to think, I want to commit not to do this anymore, to whatever degree we can, right? So what are we confessing? Right? If we've killed in the past, we determine not to do that again. That's quite serious negative action, or quite, we say, coarse, obvious negative action. But if it's that I've just pursued pleasure and at the expense of taking time for spiritual practice, saying I want to stop doing that, to whatever degree we can commit to making our lives more in accordance with this Bodhisattva path. So then he says, so from it says, it's literally engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds, right? Bodhisattva practices. It's translated in English as a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, which is nice. But in Tibetan and also in Sanskrit, Bodhisattva Charya Vatara. So engaging or entering into the deeds of the Bodhisattva, the practices of the Bodhisattva. This was the second chapter, confession of sin, negativity. So now we come to chapter 3, which, as I said, this is adopting the enlightened attitude, taking the Bodhisattva vows, essentially. Now we talked about Bodhisattva vow. Maybe we can talk a little bit of what that means before we get into it. I've come to the firm decision now. It took me a few years studying Vinaya and then studying Abhidhamma this year, which is a lot of the same themes, that there's quite a problem of translation, actually. And it's really become actually habitual. And I just translated this book on the six-session Guru Yoga, and we're going to the very final edits now. And I had to go back and change quite a few things because I realized I wasn't even looking at the Tibetan and translating what the Tibetan says. I was using such a standard convention now that it's just become the way we speak in Western Dharma circles, I suppose. But when we talk about vows, so we talk about, like, people say, as a monastic, you have 253 vows, and as a layperson, you have 5 vows. And if you lie, you're breaking your vows. That's actually that's not correct. That's not what it says in the traditional text. So we have to understand what is meant by vow. So first of all, the word that's translated as vow is dompa in Tibetan, which is, I think, samvara in Sanskrit. It does not mean vow. It means restraint, right? So that's one issue, but also so you have 253 monastic, you don't have 253 restraints. They don't use that word, dompa, in Tibet. You have 253 transgressions or downfalls, which means that essentially we can think about it. If we want to use the word vow, if you take monastic vows, you're taking the vow to practice as a monastic. That is a vow. That is a commitment. And a vow means a promise. Then there are actions that are contrary to that commitment, right? But to think that I'm taking a vow for each one individually, that's actually not what we're doing. And so it's important to know that, because then we say, oh, I broke my vows today. It's like, it sounds very different than I have certain trainings that I'm trying to practice and I didn't quite measure up to them. I wasn't able to do them, as opposed to saying I broke my vow is like saying I offended my teacher by going against what I promised I was going to do. And it has a different connotation, right? So us actually, as monastics, we say dompa, the word dompa, with these restraints. We have 7, which is to not kill, not steal, not engage in sexual activity, and then not lie, not speak harshly, not have to speak divisively, and not use idle speech, which are the first 7 non-virtues. For lay people, it's the 4, right? The first 4 of your precepts are the 4 non-virtues that you commit not to do. So that is the vow. Those are the 4. I mean, if you want to use the word vow, really it's the restraints. And we are restraining from those. We're trying to maintain that we don't do those. which again, I think we think of it as restraint, then we can see that it's a practice. We recognize that we can't always stop ourselves. It's not that we make an excuse, but I like to think of it as playing a sport, that you know what you're supposed to do ideally if you want to be an expert in the game. So you learn all the rules, but until you're an expert, it's very hard to follow. To be a monastic and always keep all 253 of the trainings all the time perfectly, it's from day one. I don't know anyone who does that. Right? But when somebody has practiced a long time, sometimes they can. So we grow into this practice. We don't have to have this strong sense of keep making mistake again and again and blaming ourselves. We're trying to master that. Now, with the heaviest ones, of course, those are the fundamental ones, the root vows, the root restraints. But if we transgress those in a very serious way, then we do lose the vow. Or really, I mean, yeah, don't batang in Tibetan. So it's like you give up, you lose. Essentially, you say lose. You have to retake the vow. So for Bodhisattva vows, it's really the Bodhisattva vow, I would say. It's the promise to achieve enlightenment. Now, within that, we have two levels, right? We have in Tibetan, it's munsem and juksem, right? Which means the mind aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta, right? So there's actually no such thing as the vow of an aspiring bodhicitta. It's an aspiration, right? It's the developing the wish to achieve complete enlightenment, and making that commitment. So sometimes we could say it's a promise, like in Tibetan they use the word damcha, which is like a firm commitment. Then when we actually take vows in a ceremony, then that is the engaging. Jukdong, they say in Tibetan, which means the restraints of the engaging mind. So this is where we actually commit to practice the Bodhisattva practices, essentially the six perfections. And this is something I actually haven't gotten clarity on. So what I said is a monastic, it's not very clear. It is clear, sorry, it's very clear, but it's not always obvious, because obviously there's been misunderstandings in the translation. But if you really read the Vinaya very carefully, it's clear that a fully ordained monastic has 7 dompa, 7 restraints. So how many a Bodhisattva practitioner has, actually, I'm not entirely determined, whether it's the 18 root ones or maybe it's the 6 perfections. I think that might be more the point, that it's the 6 perfections that we trained to practice in generosity, ethical discipline, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. So then the downfalls, there's 18 root downfalls and 46 secondary faults that we commit to restrain from, not to commit to them, then those are transgressive of that. That if you want to live in this way, it's saying that this is actions that are contrary to that. It's very helpful to learn those. It's not that you learn them with the sense of self-retribution. It's saying, I aspire to practice this way. It's the advice of past practitioners, saying that if you really want to practice this lifestyle, these are actions that we've seen to be contrary to that. Otherwise, it's just to say, be a good person. It's not enough. Right? We have to have some more structure of what we're trying to do. So if you take Bodhisattva vow, what you're doing is committing to practice the 6 perfections for the purpose of attaining enlightenment, for the benefit of sentient beings. It's a very serious commitment. I'd say it's in some sense more serious than taking monastic vows, although as a monastic, of course, if you take monastic vows, it's more of an obvious change in your life. You wear robes, you commit not to have a relationship, which for many people is a very big thing. So you're making a very big shift in your life. But in the text, it says, if you give back monastic vows, there's no particular negativity accumulated to doing so. Of course, you take vows for life, and you encourage not to give back your training. But if you do, you get the merit of having trained that long. You don't get very heavy negative action from giving back the commitment. But in the Bodhisattva vows, it's not that way. If you give back your Bodhisattva vow, that's considered a very heavy negative action because you have promised to work for the benefit of sentient beings. Now you're giving back your promise to do that. So it's saying, as Shantideva says later, it says once, samam samamitsam cha, mitsam pani chokyingi, same dopamichaho. So he's saying, at the beginning, you should check whether you can do this or not. Right? If you can't, not to commit is best. Not to start this path is best, in the sense, not that it's good not to start, but it's better to do that than to turn back, he's saying. Once you've started, don't turn back, because you'll create a very strong habitual imprint to give back your promise in future lifetimes, to not commit, not to follow through with your commitments. So we have to be very certain. That's what we want to do, is to commit to this path. Whether you're a monastic or a layperson, it makes no difference. You practice, if you're a Bodhisattva practitioner, it's a separate ceremony, it's a separate commitment. So as I said before about my doctor friend, that's very much in accordance with the Bodhisattva way of life. If somebody practices that way, seriously, if everybody was a monk, then we'd all be pretty sick, right? No doctors. So we need different people that can function in different ways. And I think we think about the Bodhisattva path, maybe it's important that the Bodhisattva path is understood as a very long path. And maybe in different lifetimes, we need to practice in different ways to sort of develop different aspects of our mind. And so for that friend he was very interested in Buddhist path, and I would not be surprised if he had very strong karma. He seemed to, especially with Japan. He ended up marrying a Japanese woman, actually, but seemed to be very drawn to going to Japan. He was quite fluent in Japanese by the time in college. Wanted to go to the monastery there, so clearly some connection with that. But then it seemed like in this life it was better to do this, to follow this path. So we have to decide what's the best way to follow for ourselves. But the most important thing is that whatever path we choose, that we live in accordance with these principles. So we don't, of course, being a doctor is a very obvious thing in terms of helping others, but you could have an office job. It's not necessarily out of accordance with the principles, as long as we're not doing something that's actively contributing to harm. The most important thing is how we do that. Right? If you're a doctor, but you're just looking for money, or you don't listen to your patients, and your people find it very difficult to be around you, then that's unfortunate. Right? That could still be a benefit, absolutely, but the Bodhisattva path it's very much about how we live day to day and how we interact with others. It's not just about, can I have some resume that makes it look like I'm a great person? It's about, are the people around us inspired by us, and do they find it comforting to be around us, and do they find that we take them seriously and don't just focused on our own needs and what we want, that we listen to others. Then you could be just a very humble person. Nobody really knows. That's actually what's often emphasized in the text, is like Shantideva himself says the story that he was a monk in the monastery and didn't seem to do anything. People thought he was just a waste of space because he's sitting in his room all day, what eats the monastery food, doesn't seem to contribute anything, right? But they don't realize the strength of his mind. So we never know. So we were talking here about this committing to this Bodhisattva vows. So I think what we can do, maybe, so we talked about we should do a meditation today. And we also going to have a break. I think maybe what would be good, because sometimes I think the break, what we do is have a teaching until 12 and then have a break till 12:15 or so, and then that's at the end. I don't know, but that seems a little bit uneven. So why don't we can think about doing a meditation now. And then we can, after the break, we can talk about the chapter. We can also have time for question and answer. But when we do a meditation here, maybe we can think about this a bit. Now, we're not taking the Bodhisattva vows. I'm not going to force anyone to do that. But we can think about, what does this mean? Think a little bit about what it would mean to take this, so we can say a simulacrum, or a kind of imagining taking this commitment. So what I'll do is just sort of summarize some of the themes in this chapter. And we can imagine kind of taking this on, or just, I think, what would it be like to do that? But let's sit quietly for a couple of minutes, and then I'll begin guiding the meditation. So actually, we begin here just by rejoicing. Just how the chapter begins. Thinking about all of the work that's being done to benefit others, all of the whatever's obvious to us. We can think about all the people in the world who are working to benefit others, devoting their lives in whatever way, whether it's a religious practitioner, as a practitioner of medicine, whether in any way, people who are just committed to not just thinking about I, but about greater good. And then thinking about beings that might be beyond our capacity to imagine, these celestial bodhisattvas who are guiding the world, rejoicing in all of that, thinking how wonderful this is. Not to counter this thought of everybody's just in it out for themselves and everybody is thinking selfishly, but actually there are beings who are thinking beyond that, and think how wonderful that is. So then we move on to thinking about the sufferings of sentient beings, thinking that whatever merit I have, whatever merit I've created in my life and this other lifetimes, whatever practice I've done, that I dedicate this fully to dispel the suffering of sentient beings. That is my purpose. The purpose of existing is to benefit others. There's no other reason for me to be here. There's no other use of all the good I've done if it's not to dispel the suffering of sentient beings. So imagine that sentient beings are like sick patients and thinking, for as long as they are sick, as long as their illness continues, may I be the doctor, may I be the medicine, may I be the nurse. Just imagine. This isn't any kind of commitment here. Just imagine. Imagine if I could do that. Imagine if I could just appear wherever they are suffering, appear before them, be the one to comfort them, to help them through this illness, to help them through the mental anguish, wishing so much that we could do that. And imagine all these people in the world who are starving, animals who are starving, who are thirsty and who lack the requisites of life. Just imagine, may I appear as those. I just be a rain of food and drink that just appears spontaneously wherever it is needed. Whatever beings need, may I just appear that way. We have that very strong wish, that very strong aspiration. It might seem impossible, but this is just imagine a creative imagination. Imagine what would it be like if I could do that? If I could just appear in whatever way they need. That we think about this body we have. Imagine if I could just transform this body into something that would be that for all beings. Thinking rather than thinking so much, I need to protect this body, I need to protect myself and bring myself pleasure, transforming that into what if I had the opportunity that every atom in my body could be transformed into something and I could just give this away to all beings. How wonderful that would be. That's all I want to do. That's all I wish for. There's no wish of letting go of anything about wishing, because as Santideva says here, if I wish to achieve nirvana, this is how I do that. I give everything away. Giving everything away is peace. So I will give it to sentient beings to use as they wish. So if others take my body and they beat me, they criticize me, please continue. Please do what you wish. I offer this to you. Imagine this wish. What would it be like to think this way? Thinking, whatever it is, whatever reason sentient beings make a connection with me, if they look at me with faith, they look at me with anger, whatever it is, whatever reason somebody turns to me, may that fulfill their wish. May it be the cause for their enlightenment. So now there's various, we say, analogies or various, we say, specific needs of sentient beings. So now I'll just read through these one at a time. So may I be the protector for those without a protector. May I be the guide for those who enter paths. May I be for those who wish to cross over the boat, the bridge, the raft, the other shore. For those who are looking for dry land, may I be the island. Those who need light, may I be the lamp. Those who are looking for a place to stay, may I be their home. For those who desire a servant, may I be the servant. It goes on with all these analogies of like a wish-fulfilling jewel, like an efficacious mantra. Whatever beings wish, fulfilling their wishes, like the earth, the sky, just being present for all of them, expansive in that way. And then being very specific. Now this is the creative visualization, but now committing, just as the Tathagatas of the past, the Sugatas of the past, Buddhas of the past, just as they have generated the awakening mind and engaged in the Bodhisattva practices in the same way, may I do so in order to benefit beings. I will engage in those practices. And then finally thinking about how wonderful this is that we generate this mind. See, this is the great nectar that destroys the death for sentient beings. This is the inexhaustible treasure for those afflicted with poverty. This is the great medicine for the sick, for those wandering on paths and weary. This is the resting place, the shade under the tree. This is the raft or the footpath for those to cross out of the miserable states of existence, to free them. This is the rising sun of the mind for those afflicted with the anguish of afflictions. For those mired in unknowing, this is the rising sun. This is the great butter that is churned from the milk of the ocean of Dharma. So we think today I rejoice in this, having taken this commitment. For those wandering in the ocean or in the path of cyclic existence. They take joy today that I will be their protector. In the presence of all beings, in the presence of the guides, of the Buddhas. Today I invite all as my guests. May everyone take joy in this wonder. Okay, so we'll have a little bit of a break now. I'm back in just a few minutes. Those of you online, I hope you can stay tuned with us. Have a little tea wherever you are. We'll see you. We'll say it's 11:40 now, so we'll say 11:50. We'll try to return. So if you have any questions, also please prepare those, and we'll have a question and answer session. And then if there's time, I'll continue with the text. Okay, good. It's nice to see everyone's still here. So, as I said, we'll just have some question and answer now and see how that goes. And if there aren't a lot of questions, then I'll continue on with the text. So, of course, we'll prioritize questions that are related to what I talked about today. But as always, if people have questions in general, that's always allowed, right? You can ask any kind of important questions you have about Buddhist practice, Buddhist philosophy, about life, I suppose. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer, but
I have a question, Venerable.
you'd like to ask. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Dr. Shruti. Actually, I spoke
Yeah.
about the Tara, right? The green Tara and the red Tara.
Yeah,
So I had two questions.
last night.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not able to
Yes.
come for the class. I'm attending online. So I had two questions.
Yeah.
Tara,
Okay.
I'll ask later. One is regarding the debt. Like working in the wellness profession, I just wanted to ask, like, how do the patients or any human being to train, because we don't know, death is uncertain, we don't know when the death is going to come. It can come to a healthy person as well as a terminal illness patient, end stage renal disease or a cancer patient, etc. So when you're alive, like whether you're healthy or not healthy, we don't know, like next day you're going to wake up or not, right? So how do we program our mind that every day that uh, how do we face death? Like, it can be painful because we have not seen how death is going to be, right? Even for a cancer patient, it can be a painless death. So how do we train or, like just tell that affirmation about, that, like, what is that we need to tell that every day for us before we wake up or after when we go to bed, or or every moment or every second, because we don't know, death can come at any time.
Yeah. So the question is, what do we do, right? Say, prepare for death or prepare our minds. Of course, the traditional approach, there are two meditations. It's essentially, the point is to bring it into our awareness rather than trying to shut it out of our awareness. Right? It's not something that is a very hidden phenomenon, we could say. It's something very obvious. We look around us, but nevertheless, a large part of human energy is spent on trying not to think about it, trying to put away things. That's the story of the Buddha's life, that when he left the palace and the king tried to set everything up that he wouldn't see anybody sick or dying. It, very poignant description. Right? That's essentially how society functions. So we tried to bring that into our conscious awareness. So I said there's two general approaches. One is just to imagine the process of dying. Imagine what it would be like. In both the physical process, but also imagine I receive a terminal diagnosis. What goes through my mind? And then the process of gradually coming to terms with that and letting go. What would it be like to tell my family I've received this diagnosis? And then the physical process, the pain I would experience, and then the process of dying, the last day, the stages, what would it be like? And finally, I'm not breathing, things like this. So just go through those. There's descriptions in the traditional text on how to go through that. The other one is a more reasoned process to think about essentially 3 steps, to think that death is definite. That, of course, it might be obvious, but to think about that it's certain. There's no possibility that I'm going to escape that. And then to think about that the time of death is uncertain. I know it's going to happen, but I have no way to predict when it's going to be. And then finally, what's going to matter at that moment when I'm dying? Right? That for each of these 3, there are 3 subsets, but I don't know that I'm getting into too much detail now. You can find this in the traditional text. But at that point, what will matter? We think about that. Will my wealth matter? Will my family matter? Will my body matter? In the sense, more that will it come with me? Right. So just going through those, all of them are fairly obvious. Somebody doesn't have to be a religious practitioner to take that seriously. But the actual taking the time to take it seriously and to think about that, because as we do that, hopefully, when it actually happens, it will be a little bit more prepared. And no matter how prepared we think we might be, it might not go as planned. It's not that we can just decide I'm going to die this way. A friend of mine who's a very long-term Buddhist practitioner, was an old student of Lama Geshe, came to visit us in the monastery this year. It was nice to see. He really does practice, right? He's been doing all these years. He was always a lay person. That's how he decided to follow the path, but clearly trying to apply these principles in his life. And he told me that his brother is now approaching death. And his brother said to him, he has this, I forget what the illness is exactly, but he said, I don't want to die this way. So my friend said to his brother, well, is there a good way to die? What are you talking about? Is some kind of good and bad ways to die? However it happens, it's painful, right? So it's going to be hard, however it is. It's never going to be easy. But at least we have some strength of mind that it's not going to overwhelm us, so that we have something that we feel we can ground ourselves, that I have something I've cultivated that is going to last beyond this life. So that's the traditional way. I would say just nowadays, what I find personally very helpful is I tried to read as many books on death as I can. That's the one thing that I single out. If I ever see a book that is about somebody's experience with preparing for death, or experience of people who work in hospice, or whatever it might be, I try to read those books, because I think that's the most honest thing somebody could write. I don't think many people write books about death and try to promote themselves about my experience with cancer, right? It's a very honest description. So there are many. I'd say the 2 that I personally have found most meaningful among many. Some of you might know they're both quite well-known books. One is Who Dies by Stephen Levine. It was actually something I recommended us to read when I trained in a hospice many years ago, before I was a monk. Did some real volunteer work, and they suggested, because that's what the book is about, essentially, his work as a hospice counselor, or his hospice nurse, essentially. Which that book was very much also about the spiritual process of death and his experience with people's how they come to terms with it. Another book, which is a quite different approach, but also was very well known in its time, people might not know it today, it's called How We Die by Sherman. Nuland. I'm forgetting the name, but yeah, it's a Jewish name. Nuland, something like that. Anyway, if I hit it, I would immediately remember. But you can certainly find that book. I think it's easily available. But that book, he's a doctor, and that book is quite blunt, we could say. So essentially, I'm just going to describe how people die, and it's not how people expect that the physical pain they go through, and all the different ways he goes to people who die of cancer, people who die of AIDS, people who are murdered, and his observation of many years of practice. What is it like for them? What? Yeah, that's it. Sherwin Nuland. Yeah. So there you go. Because after reading Who Dies by Stephen Levine, which had from a long time was something I would also contemplate, which doesn't go into the gory details of what it's like. This book does that. But that's great. That's really important.
Yeah, in addition to this, I had this query. It might be a naive question.
Okay.
Like people who have
Yes.
lost their loved ones, like you have physical
Yes.
death of a person, and also the same person suffering from heartbreak or a divorce or a loss of their parents or their child. They also suffer this sort of a death. They say my whole world is gone. How they have to train their mind, like both the person who's dying with physical trauma as well as mental trauma, that they are going to die one day, but how do they make themselves happy even at the time of death?
So are you asking how does somebody who's lost a loved one, how do they cope with
Or
it?
separated, or they because there are patients who get into suicidal thoughts.
Okay,
Right?
so how to deal with
How
suicidal
to
thoughts?
prevent this? Some of the patients are there which I have handled, like cancer patients, and they're mentally strong. They've survived for 20 years, and there are some palliative care who they've lost their loved ones. They're so attached. They want to just end their life. It can be like a false suicidal. They
Right, so
they
how to help patients who are having suicidal thoughts? Is that the question?
Yes, because that is also a
Okay.
death, right? There is a normal death or a
Right.
transitional
Yeah.
death.
Okay.
You got my question. It's
So
a bit complicated,
that's a difficult question,
Venerable.
right? Because that's also very much an ethical question these days, and it's a big question in politics and in society, right? Um, so there's a few things to say about that. I mean, generally, the Buddhist principle is that there is no time when it is useful to commit suicide. The Buddha himself was very clear about that. As monastics, of course, we have the vow not to kill. So as a Buddhist monastic, if somebody asked me, should I end my life because I have a terminal illness, and I said that's a good idea, and they did it, I would not be I would have to give back my monastic vow. That's a defeat for monastic. So that's something the Buddha took very seriously. The understanding essentially is that at any point in time, if we choose to terminate a human life, it's of course there are degrees of it. I would say it's much less negative to take one's life when you have a terminal illness and there's no hope of recovery than it is to go and murder somebody. But at the same time, it is taking human life. It is shortening a human lifespan, and thinking about how incredibly rare and precious it is to have this human life. It's not that we're judgmental of anybody who makes that decision, because I can understand. Obviously, we can all understand why somebody might choose that path. But there are other ways to think about it, right? Other counter ways to think about it. And there was one very nice article in the Mandala magazine some years ago. There was a man, I never met him, but I was a student of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, apparently. I think it was Bob Brintz was the name, who had Lou Gehrig's disease. Some of you might know that. It's ALS. Right? In America, we call it Lou Gehrig's disease. Which is a degenerative illness where you had essentially your muscles stop working and eventually you have no function whatsoever. So he was saying in that article that he understands many of his companions who have such illness, they choose to end their life. He says, I understand why they would, but for me, he was saying, every moment that I have is another moment to contemplate the Guru's kindness. Why would I want to lose that opportunity? So especially if we're religious practitioners, we have a great opportunity as we're dying. What better opportunity to meditate if we can use that? Now, when we talk about things like palliative substances like drugs and so forth, I think generally that's accepted as okay. We don't have to just decide that we're going to go through no drugs and experience all of the pain. If somebody is really at the level where they can do that, actually that's great, but I don't think the Buddha would say, oh, you shouldn't take any kind of medication to relieve the pain. But in terms of having your mind with you to try to contemplate on these things. So I think if somebody is asking you that, if they are a religious practitioner, then that's one way to approach it, is to think that you have this opportunity to, if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu and have a belief in a creator God, and that to become closer to your creator and use the time to reflect, right, to every moment you have in this existence. And if somebody has no religious belief, to think that at least we have time in our life to reflect upon what we've done. This is the value of the death process. To think that there's no use in my life anymore. That might be part of the idea. So I'm just a burden on others. There's no point in my being around anymore. I think that's a mistake. Society is not just about being a contributing member of society. We could say that it's not just about building things or making money. It's also about being somebody with wisdom and being somebody who cultivates that wisdom and can offer it to others. So they have some connection. They have something they can do to offer to others through this process and be an inspiration in the way that they go through this process, rather than just saying, well, there's no point in me being here and I'll just leave, which might be traumatic for the family. I can't say, maybe in some cases it is easier for the family not to see them go through that. But I think in a lot of ways, it is beneficial for everybody to not, as you say, not to just shut that away, but to recognize this is the nature of human existence. You had something else to say?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying this,
Okay. Yeah.
Venerable. And second question was yesterday's connection. You told red tara is for the anger, right? And green tara is for which, for the tantric we were discussing, right? There are different colors of taras.
So you're saying which one is the tantric aspect and which one is not? Is that the question?
The question was yesterday, the Mother Tara, she's
Right.
being prayed in Mahayana and then also in Vajrayana and also in Hinayana. And going to the higher level of practice, you told the red Tara is like for the anger and for the transmutation of the anger. So green Tara was for which particular emotion?
Okay, the different colors. Essentially, in general, in tantric practice, is based on the understanding of the 5 Buddha families. Right? So in a general sense, a red deity, as you say, is the transformation of anger into the wisdom of individual discrimination. And then the green is the transformation of jealousy into the wisdom of enlightened activities.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay,
there was a question in the chat, and I missed it because now the AI companion has popped up. Is there? Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Here.
Can I can say it out, the question.
Oh, you're the one who wrote it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I know we're running out of time. So, it's just, I find that to break habitual patterns is really hard when you're surrounded by the same people who kind of reiterate these habitual patterns, right? Like in our day-to-day life, when we're living with family or partners or community, somewhere the same habitual patterns keep getting reiterated. So, just wondering if you had any guidance on how much to engage, how much to disengage, to kind of make changes, because to make a change, to follow the path, we need some kind of a pause, some space for reflection. So how does one sort of balance this? I mean, in some sense, I think when you're in a monastic life, it's a little easier to do that, but when you're caught in the middle of all the people and patterns, it's so much harder. So So wondering if you had any guidance around that.
I think, of course, that's a very broad question,
Yeah.
but in a general sense, it's ideal to try to create some space where you can try to cultivate something different. Because you're right, as we just go through the same lifestyle, it's very hard to change it because we are habituated to acting a certain way. So that's, of course, as monastics, that's what we're trying to do, is separate ourselves from the normal flow of society and wear different clothes and appear differently, but it helps us to maintain the mindfulness that we are acting according to different values. So for somebody who is a lay person, as much as we can approximate that, we have a few options. We can get up early in the morning before everyone else has gotten up and meditate where others are not disturbing us. We can have a separate room in our house. I mean, I'm not saying everyone can do this. It depends on your situation, but these are options. If you have them, separate room where you designate this room for meditation practice, such that when your mind goes in there, it naturally is focused on these thoughts. We can have time of the day when we shut off our phone. We don't. Ideally, we have some space to work with our minds. Or we can also, if possible, structure time of the year to do retreat, such that we are focused single-pointedly on these things and not having the distractions of day to day. So if it's not all the time, at least it's part of the time. Also, that's why we take vows of various capacities, right? So if we take vows as a lay practitioner, at least we are committed, although we are not monastics, we are still committed to avoid certain negative actions that are very contrary to the lifestyle we're trying to cultivate. And also we can take one-day vows. Right? That's something, I don't know how many people do that on a regular basis, but the Buddha certainly recommended that to lay followers. The Buddha suggested, especially, this is sort of just a way to be mindful of it, is on the 8th, 15th, and 30th of the lunar calendar. But it doesn't have to be. If it's easier for you to do it on Sunday, then that's fine. But you take one-day vows. So you can either do that. There's one-day vows within the Pratimoksha, or there's the one-day 8 Mahayana precepts you may have heard of, which is literally the word should mean Mahayana Poshada, or Mahayana purification and restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Where you vow for one day. So you're essentially living by the principles of a novice monk for the one day. And so that you at least cultivate some space. Though I don't live as a monk all the time, but for part of the time I am. That way we can create space in our minds that we can break through the ordinary patterns that we go through in our life. But of course, most of all, it's just about learning the teachings. Right? We have to know what patterns we're trying to cultivate. And which patterns that we have that we start to see as faulty, in order that we have the wisdom to distinguish.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Venerable. This is really helpful.
Yes, good,
Thank you.
good.
And one last question I had, Venerable, Dr. Shruti here.
Okay,
Regarding the last stage of death, right?
Yeah.
The patient or any individual, whether it's cancer or mental crisis or end stage renal disease or an accident, right? They would not have that energy to reflect on the death meditation. Is it okay for
Yeah.
them to chant this medicine Buddha mantra or Tara mantra? How will that help them?
So after somebody has died, can you recite that for them? Is that your
Not
question?
after a person, an individual who's
Well, so you're saying
because
somebody's in a car accident, like while
an
they're
example,
about
like
to
on the
die,
last
or what do
stage
you
of
mean?
their life. You can't say last stage of their life. Like we don't know when the death is going to come, right? Like they can be a last stage
Right.
cancer patient, fourth stage. They might outlive the normal person also, right? So
Right.
the end stage person, is it instead of reflecting because they don't have that energy? So is it okay for them to chant Om Mani Padme Hum or Tara Mantra or Medicine Buddha? How
Of
will
course.
that
Yeah, it's good.
okay?
We say that is protective, right? That's why the word mantra is understood as mind protection. So unless our mind is very powerful, it's very hard to change the mind. It's a lot easier to change our speech. So our mind, we say I was just in a car accident and I have 5 minutes to live. I'm lying there dismembered on the ground, it might be very difficult for me to transform my mind into a positive, virtuous mental state. But if I can at least say virtuous words and try to focus my mind on that, that's very good. And of course, the understanding in the tradition is that the mantra is essentially, in English, we have the word incantation, which people don't use very much these days, which it has a vibration that it's understood, that it's tuning into. And so it's not just your own aspiration, it's also tuning into something that is more powerful than yourself. So absolutely, that's if somebody wants to do that, then by all means, yes.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Is there questions here in the audience? I apologize, but I've been focused on the computer.
In Buddhism, there is a Tara mantra or mantra.
Yeah.
But in Hinduism, also thousands of mantras are there.
Right.
But like, if somebody wants to chant this Hindu mantra, is it okay?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly, what His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says is, if somebody is a follower of a different religion, best to stick with your own religion, right?
No, if mantra has
Yeah.
the same effect.
So if somebody is a question that you're a Buddhist, but you recite a Hindu mantra, or what is the question?
Yeah. Because if mantra has the same impact on everyone, so any mantra
I mean,
has impact. Because
there's different ways to think about that, right? As I say, it's like, as Buddhist practitioners, we have generally the view that this is the best path. I tend to be a very, ecumenical thought process, that I wouldn't say it's the best for everybody, right? I can't say whether it's the best in any kind of general sense. But if we've committed to the Buddhist path, it's good as much as possible to stay focused within that, right? If we get, I don't think it's really ideal that people kind of mix different religions. And to a certain extent, it's great if somebody is one religion and they want to read other, think about, draw inspiration from other religions. But in terms of, it's like, if we're really serious about the Buddhist path, then ideally we would find connection with that. But at the same time, if somebody has raised in a certain way and they feel sort of an intuitive connection with that because they've chanted this mantra from a young age, and at the time of death, it's very hard to just decide, and it comes out spontaneously to do that. It's certainly better than keep having a negative mind. And so if it helps you, and that's what you really feel is best, then it's not bad per se. It's you have to think for yourself, kind of before. But I would say now that you're not imminently dying, to have the thought, well, to think about it, to think about what path do I want to follow, and maybe between now and the time of death, if you want to be serious about practicing the Buddhist path, if you gradually cultivate a practice of a particular Buddhist deity, then it might eventually feel more connection with that. And that's fine. I mean, it's it's very hard for us. We say we're essentially changing religions if we come from a Hindu background and then practice Buddhism. And so we shouldn't just force ourselves and say, I shouldn't think about those old deities anymore. I should just think about Buddhist deities. So if it's helpful, for us over time, like for myself, coming from I came from a mixed background, not really religious anyway as a child, but coming from a Christian culture and it's from Jewish family. But so I had connection with both of them. And for the first few years as a Buddhist, I did spend time reading more books, Christian books, and thinking about the teachings of Jesus. Or we did a lot of Jewish chanting at my summer camp, so I had there's a lot of those memorized. But over time, as I became more and more focused on Buddhist practice, it just kind of naturally fell away. It was less resonating for me than the practices I had cultivated. But you have to see for yourself, and it's not.
My question is, does the mantra affect human life? Because
does it affect the human life? Is the question.
Because she was asking the question, if somebody in the last stage, stage 4 cancer, and the person is dying, whether he is religious, non-religious. Let us say he was a non-religious background, and we gave him mantra, chant Mani Padme Hum, or we might give some other Hindu mantra. For Hinduism also, for every occasion there is separate mantra.
Okay.
So does that effect, or it is just a console to the mind that agitator?
So you're saying, is there an effect from it?
Yeah.
Rather than is it just simply something that you're doing from your own side?
Yeah, just consoling that.
The general Buddhist view is that there is an effect, right? Of course, there's question about that maybe within different Buddhist schools, right? And that's actually there's a lot of debate about those points.
Venerable, to add on to this.
Let me say though. Sorry, I'm answering his question. Sorry, I'll get to you in just a second.
Intention. Should the patient create an intention if he's in the last stage, he or she? Should they create the intention before chanting, or just they can chant blindly because they are in a last stage, right? Or should they generate the motivation?
I mean, if they can create an intention, it's better. But if they can't create an intention, then chanting blindly is better than a lot of things. So
surrendering to the Buddha and just blindly chanting, right?
Yeah. If that's what they're able to do, that's fine.
As you said,
wouldn't say don't. I wouldn't try to scold them. What?
As you told, it's linked to the quantum physics where it generates a lot of energy, vibrations, right?
Well, quantum physics, let's put aside, but I would say, because I don't want to be, I'm not something I'm 100% sure of, but in terms of the Buddhist understanding, yes, that there is, I mean, they use the word like jinlap, right? Which it has the word wave in it, right? Lap means wave. So they have this understanding that there is some kind of subtle vibration, even though they don't have quite that word in ancient Buddhist texts. But as to the question that was being asked here, which is related to what you're saying, right? So the question of how does a mantra work, right? So Dharmakirti was one of the great Indian scholars. He had a section in one of his texts discussing or debating this with the Vedic scholars. Because in the Hindu viewpoint, the mantra is essentially, at least he's blaming specifically with mimamsa. I mean, Hindu is a very general term.
Yes.
Mimamsas. And in their viewpoint, the mantra is something that is fundamentally kind of part of the nature of things, right? That it's not nobody made this up. The Vedas themselves are sort of unspoken language that was there before anybody learned language. And so he's debating with that, and he's saying it's not that way. It's not that the mantra is just a fundamental thing that was there from beginningless time. But a mantra is something that is habitual. So if many people, many generations, they use this vibration, they use this particular tone, that takes on the blessing of the people who have done that. So it is a little bit beyond certainly the normal materialist or even just ordinary way of thinking of things, but it's not something that is just inherent. It's something that comes through habituation. And so if many great masters have chanted this way, then over generations, that takes on certain power.
So no need of generating the intention or motivation. It's not required compulsorily that we have to generate motivation before chanting mantra, right?
Right. It said if you can, of course, it's better. But the understanding is that if you don't, there's still blessing in it. Because it's like, I mean, the example I use as a counterexample is we use vulgar language or swear words, right? Whatever we want to refer to it. But these also take on a certain energy, I think. So I don't agree with the viewpoint that it's just a word and then I can say it to make my point. And if it offends you, then that's your problem. I think we have to be careful of the language we use. It carries a certain energy with it. And to the opposite extent, then very positive words that people have cultivated over many generations, they carry a certain vibration that is not something inherent in it, but it is something to do with the way that there's a habitual energy that's carried. And so even if somebody doesn't believe in it, or even if somebody doesn't understand it, there's some blessing in that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There are some mantras are there and some words are there. They call it root mantra, beach mantra, root, and they don't pronounce it normally. If they are on a specific practicing or in front of deity or some kind of puja they are doing, then only they use that particular word in the mantra. And if you ask normally, tell me the mantra, they will not tell. Because they feel like that it's not auspicious or something negative effect will have if I speak normally. So mantra only chanted at a specific
right. Yeah. That's probably good, honestly.
So
I think, yeah, it's a bit of an issue with the Tibetan approach, where they, for one thing, they don't learn how to pronounce the Sanskrit properly, but also we sometimes chant so many mantras that you're just rushing through it. I think it would actually be good if we learned a little bit more. Now, there are Tibetan teachers who argue that what's important is how your teacher chants it. It's not how the Sanskrit is. But whatever the case may be, to try then listen to our teacher very carefully and try to pronounce it correctly. So I think that's a great thing in the tradition, if that can be preserved, because there is some understanding that the particular vibration does have some effect.
Yeah, they do not speak on publicly.
Right.
So
That's
how
also
do we mitigate, how do we mitigate this
that's
risk?
important, because it creates a certain power to something if it's not spoken of publicly a lot. Sometimes that's misunderstood in the modern world. It's like, why isn't everything just out in public for everyone to understand? But part of the point is that if it's kind of just, how do we say, if it's just kind of vulgarized, is one way to put it. If it just becomes part of the common language, it loses its potency.
But is it good to give same type of mantra to a dying person?
Well, as I said, good or bad, it's sort of a matter of degree, right? For if somebody's Hindu, when as a Hindu priest gives them to them, then I think that's great. Now, as Buddhist, the standard Buddhist view is essentially that only Buddhist path leads to liberation. Whether that's true or not, I really can't comment, and I have some skepticism about it, honestly. Maybe full liberation is a different thing, but I'm not of the view that like other religions are all wrong and Buddhism is the only one that's right. I find that hard. But nevertheless, I think if somebody has cultivated a particular practice, then that's the best one for them. And so the teacher should help them with that and give them something that is in accordance with that. So certainly in the Buddhist tradition, yes, it would be common that a teacher would say, you have this mantra, please recite this. And part of the understanding is that the power comes from the teacher. The person's more even than the teacher is the person's devotion to their teacher. That will uplift their mind and help them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
I'm thinking about the motivations and the aspiring motivation that is mentioned for the lecturing Bodhisattva motivation.
Yes.
Sometimes as lay people, because we are not part of a sangha which is practicing every single day, we let me just say, I forget it. And then it is a whole different process. So my question is from Choe Khor Sum Ling side, actually. When we are in a small growing sangha, what practices can we do? I mean, in terms of also what you did in your previous center that can help people keep their practices, their commitments as a community. And what can we do as a lay sangha?
So you're asking specifically about Bodhisattva commitments or just generally about them? Okay. Yeah, there's many things. I mean, so one is, maybe there's three things we could say. One is to have kind of, for people who have taken some level of vow, that they can meet regularly together and discuss and have even confession in some sense, that is something that you should do. I mean, it's ideal if you can have, especially if it's monastic, party moksha, then if you can have a monastic receive the confession, it is more in accordance with the tradition, but it's also allowed to do it to another layperson if their monastic is not available. So you can do that within your community. And then also, you can then request teachings on the vows and on the trainings from somebody, and then learn about them. That's important to know about the trainings. And then you can also do the purifications that are associated with them. So For the pratimoksha level, which is if you've taken life.
Hi everyone. It may be that there is a power cut in the center or that the Wi-Fi cut out. I'm just messaging people in the center to find out what's going on, and hopefully we'll be back on in a minute. Thank you for your patience.
The pratimoksha, which is if you have lay vows, that you can take the 1 day precepts as the purification. For Bodhisattva vows, it's to do the 8 Mahayana precepts or to take the Bodhisattva vows again, which you can do either alone or as a community. And then if you have tantric commitments or vows, then if you have done the retreat of a particular deity, you can do the self-empowerment ritual. And you can do that together as a community also, if possible. It's good to do that. Rinpoche used to say do it at least once a year, if you can. So that was essentially.
There's no questions in chat, Venerable. I was just messaging attendees.
Okay. own practice also would be an excellent way to help them to not just physically, but that they would feel some closure in their life and some support at the end. It might not always be possible. It's quite actually the struggle for a lot of us as monastics, because I know if my parents, either of them die in the next 6 years, which is quite likely, then I can't go home. It's not possible. So it's difficult, right? It's part of life. So part of that is coming to terms with the reality. This is the nature of things. But if it is possible, it's certainly worth it. It's certainly, I've seen that from the experience of people I know who have done that. And so to try to think about how could we, because we know it's going to happen, and it might be in certain cases quite obvious that it's going to happen before too long, to start planning for having the financial and other necessities that when that happens, I'm already planning to do that, to give that space.
It's an addition to this question. Yeah. As a part of your monastic training, the Tibetan monastic training, is the meditation on death and dying something that you do really like in hospitals or is it done very smoothly?
I mean, essentially, as you know, with Sera Monastery, Sera is like most Gaelic monasteries. They're very, very focused on what they're doing. So, for good or bad, I think there's positive and negative sides to it, right? Our focus is on debate and learning the teachings. There's not a lot of extraneous things. We don't go out much, right? At first, that was hard for me to take too, because it's not maybe what I expected. But over the years, I've come to really appreciate it, that there's all kinds of things you could do with your time, and you'll always find other ways to distract yourself. And then distract is not right, but it's like they say, even with virtuous practices, they can be a distraction. So anyway, the point is, in our tradition, there's not a lot of that. It's at the same time, it's encouraged. And if people from their own side, certainly no one in the monastery is going to say, "Oh, don't go into a hospice and focus on death." But at the same time, if it becomes that you're just leaving the monastery for months at a time, then that is an obstacle to continuing with the practice. But traditionally in Buddhist cultures, that is certainly something that is recommended. And like I know in Southeast Asia, there is more of that monks will go out and just observe people dying or observe bodies. There was actually a book that I was trying to get for a house. It was hard because they had a book that is actually published by a Thai monastic community that is just pictures of dead bodies. But it's a bit hard to do that because I'm not sure how the legality of that. So they weren't able to send it to us. I think they couldn't publish anymore or something. But that kind of thing, absolutely, is beneficial. And in some sense, it's just going to happen, as she has pointed out, that we can't avoid death. And whenever, for example, in the monastery, when monks die, it's something that we all see. They don't hide the body; they carry the body out and do a ceremony and burn the body. So it's right out there in the open. There was something I was going to say. Can you repeat your question, and it might remind me of what I was going to say?
Okay. I was asking if in the monastic practice that you are allowed to practice with palliative care.
Right, with palliative care.
Process.
Yeah, so I think another thing I would say is it's actually very much allowed in the monastery. If somebody is dying in the monastery, then it's very easy to get permission to just take care of them. And even if a lay person comes to the monastery to die, then a monk will be given full permission to miss monastery activities, to just be with them while they're dying. So that's certainly part of the practice. And so yes, hospice. I was going to say actually at the beginning to her question, I certainly think hospice is an excellent institution. As mentioned, that I trained in that as a young person. I did it for about 2 years training. The training was actually the most important part. It was excellent. They went for 9-week training, not every day, but just thinking about death, and they had really learned how to train people to come to terms with their own death. And then for a couple of years at least, then spending time with people who were dying. I wish I could go back and do that, but again, as I said, we said we get very focused in what we're doing in the monastery. But it has happened. There have been monks who have gotten sick, and we have time to spend with them. So that's something I think. And if somebody is dying and it's really certain that they're going to die, I think I would certainly want that option myself, rather than dying in a hospital or kind of heroic measures, things like that. I think it's really good to come to terms with the reality of it. And I mentioned one last thing I will mention. I have to research this perhaps more, although it's something I was very intrigued by. We talked about doctor-assisted suicide, and I mentioned the Buddhist viewpoint on that, which is essentially that it's not something that's encouraged. However, there's another method that has been I've heard about, which is called the official medical term now is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, which actually I think when I heard that, what it reminded me of my own teacher. When my teacher, Kapje Rinpoche, passed away, 3 days before he passed away, he said, "Okay, no more food, no more medicine." What's that? James, yeah. So as long as it's not a suicidal thing, it's certain you're going to die, but it's not that you're intentionally hastening the process. You're just not helping yourself to stay alive anymore. And anyway, there's some good scientific evidence now that a lot of things are beneficial about it. For example, that when the person doesn't eat, there's a lot less pain. There's not the digestive issues that people face or whatever other things. I think spiritually, from my own experience of fasting, you're not as in your body. And so there's more openness to spiritual cultivation. So it's something I personally, when I heard that, I thought that's great. I look forward, perhaps, who knows, but that's what I think I would probably want to do. I can't say now how I would feel at the time, but I think that's not out of accord with the Buddhist teachings, right? Because someone is not intentionally, they're not shortening the process. But as I say, I can't say because I'm not endorsing this publicly in the sense that I think I'd have to discuss it a lot more with other Sangha members, and also that I've essentially watched a few videos on a website that's by a reputable person. It's not just a random thing, but I would want to get more kind of different opinions on it. But it's something that was intriguing to me, and so I just mentioned if people are interested to research into that, it seems to me like a very viable option. Yes.
I saw a Japanese film called The Ballad of Narayana.
Okay.
It's a beautiful film. More than anything, it shows the Japanese folklore and thinking practice. When they grow old, they retreat to this mountain, like how we have Kailash. It's called Narayana.
Mm-hmm.
And they break their teeth on a stone.
Mm-hmm.
Same practice to stop eating.
Yeah, to stop eating. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's a film which
I think that's
it's a Buddhist.
It's a film. So is this like a documentary film you're talking about? It's a movie. Okay. What's it? Ballad.
The
Ballad
of Narayana. Narayana.
Narayana. Okay. Yeah, I think, as I said, this is now a medical term, but it's not something that is new. And as I said, my teacher, I don't think he knew anything about the medical term. He just chose that, maybe based on, I have not seen that specifically in Buddhist text, but it seems to be very much accordance with, and Japan being a Buddhist country, it's quite likely it's coming from Buddhist principles. So, yeah, I think that essentially the point that it's making is that when we're getting close to death, to start thinking less about preserving the body, more about making some kind of spiritual cultivation.
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it virtue to do that for some other person? Like I'll give an example. In Jainism, they call it Sallekhana or Santhara.
Right.
And in the end, they will not eat till then.
I think that, I mean, that's a little different. I'm not an expert on Jainism, but my understanding is like, if somebody is not terminally ill, but they just voluntarily decide to not eat and die.
No, mainly they do at old ages when they know that it's time.
Oh yeah, if they know that it's time, it's a little different. Right?
Yeah, but no young person they don't do that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Incident. One
Right.
family was there.
Yeah.
And they have a kid, I think 1 or 2 years. They kept in hospital. He was terminally ill, and doctor told that it is better take him home. He'll not survive so much. So they took him to a Jain monk, and the Jain monk told that okay, go for samthara, and they did not give him for 2-3 days. They stopped giving food, but within same night the kid died.
Okay.
But it was in general public discussion that is it the right thing to do for the kid. We don't know.
I mean, right or wrong, I think it is a very difficult ethical questions, but I think personally, to me, it sounds not out of accord with Buddhist principles in as much as you said, it's not like they weren't there's two things. One is that they was not just somebody who had a chance to live. And secondly, there's no violence. They're not doing any action where you can say this is killing. Right? It's simply a matter of, we can say, rather than thinking of the negative aspect of it, think of spending the time. And of course, for the child, it's a little different, but ideally that somebody just focusing on spiritual practice rather than worrying about their body and trying to eat, force themselves to eat. For a child, that's a very hard question, right? If the child is not in the position to make the decision. I mean, in terms of legality, I think, at least in a Western country, that would be illegal. Because in this voluntarily stopping eating and dying, that person has to give consent ahead of time. Although it's interesting, she mentioned about breaking the teeth, because they say that is an issue, that if somebody gives consent, but then as it's happening, they change their mind, what do? Right? They say, please give me water. And they say, especially if they're just kind of delirious and they're not actually in the right mind. So there is actually some stipulation legally that somebody can say, even if I insist, don't give it to me. If they've signed that, then that's illegal. But if it's a child and they don't have it's a harder question. I don't have an answer to that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We'll do this very brief dedication prayers here. Page 36 in the gold book. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha. Lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenri Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. For Kepja Lammers of Birbishe, we just dedicate that the Yangtze, the reincarnation, might be free of all obstacles to continuing the work of the predecessor, and that we continue to have a relation with this being in this future lifetimes, and to follow their advice by their principles. And then finally, have a look at Ishvara, great treasure of non-objectifying compassion, Manjushri, master of stainless wisdom, Vajrapani, destroyer of the entire host of Maras, Sankapa, crown jewel of the sages of the land of snows, Tulos and Rugba, at your feet I make requests. Okay. Thank you all for coming today. Yes. Thank you. Oh, very kind. Thank you so much.
It's also from the center.
Oh, thank you.
Please come again in the book.
Yeah, we'll try. It's going to be harder, but we'll see. We'll find ways to do it. Thank you. you so much. Yeah.
So next week will be where we have Venerable Legden coming and teaching, and after which we have a 2-week winter break. And we will start on January 3rd again with teachings from. Hello, everyone. Let me just repeat. Next week we will have teachings from Venerable Galpin Legden, and then we have a 2-week winter break. And after that, we will start in January. You might have all received the mail with teachings from Venerable Thupten Chodron at our center on the Two Truths. So please join us.
Maybe we can mention also about the long life pujas. People are aware.
Yes, there are two. There are 2 long life pujas at Mungod for His Holiness, and CKSL has also applied to go and get line blessings from His Holiness. Once we hear about it, we will all inform all of you, so you can apply to come with us. And yes, all of this will happen in an email to you. And if you're interested, you can contact us at info@cksl.in. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.